The UN is fucking garbage. That's what most people say, I'm not saying that. But we look at Ukraine, we look at Kiev, we look at Russia, we look at Gaza, we look at Syria, the DRC, Somalia, Myanmar, we look at the guerrillas in South America, and we all ask the same question. Where is the United Nations? Because for decades, the UN has been criticized for making statements, passing resolutions, holding diplomatic meetings, which are fucking nonsense because wars still continue and civilians continue to suffer. So we all end in the same conclusion. The United Nations is an ineffective, bureaucratic institution incapable of solving the very conflicts it was created to prevent. Raising a more complicated question, because is the UN actually useless, or are we judging by the wrong expectations? Because the reality is that the UN exists in a system where states remain sovereign, powerful countries continue to pursue their own interests, and international organizations have limited authority. So to understand it better, I will try to explain you where did UN things start. We had the Great Wars. We had World War I in 1919, then we had 1939 Second World War, and we get the UN in 1945. The solution proposed by the international community was the creation of an international institution based on collective security. And the principle was very simple. So if one state threatens international peace, the international community should cooperate to prevent aggression. However, unlike domestic governments, the UN does not have any kind of sovereignty. No territory, no population, and it simply cannot impose any kind of decisions on any kind of state, creating the international dilemma of international organizations, because they depend on cooperation from the same states whose actions we are supposed to regulate. And this is actually one of the greatest criticisms of the UN, and where it all from 1945 and all this concept comes to play, which is the Security Council. It is the institution responsible for international security, and we have the P5, the permanent five members, which are Russia, the UK, Russia, France, China, and the US. And the problem is that they have veto power, because a single permanent member can prevent collective action, even when the majority of states are supporting intervention. So if there are 194 votes in support and only one vote against, then the resolution is completely fucked. And I know it's not easy to get Russia and the US to agree on a resolution regarding a conflict. Therefore, powerful states will not accept any kind of international institution that can consistently override their strategic objectives. And here is where you get the results, which is the UN is fucking ineffective in conflicts where major powers or their allies are involved. And yeah, we can talk now about the UN not being completely useless. We can talk about, but look, I've done more from my chair in my room than they have done. At Sierra Leone, we can look at Liberia, the blue helmets, but they are not they are not full successes, right? These are missions that support elections, rebuild institutions, and decrease violence. But we need to place it into context, because if we look at all the conflicts that have occurred since 1945, these only represent a fraction of it. And we have other failures of the international community, like in Rwanda, Srebrenica, in Serbia, I think. I'm not particularly familiar with that one. But the major problem here is that the UN does not possess any kind of independent coercive power, because it relies on member states for funding, for troops, for political support. And I know it's not fair to judge the UN only through military operations, right? So now I'm gonna say some good things about the UN. Number one. Number two. No. The UDHR. We have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And surprise, surprise, take a guess, many countries don't give a fuck about them. Do you think North Korea cares? Do you think South Sudan, Mali, Nigeria, do you think they give a fuck about Universal Declaration of Human Rights? And this is another problem. This is another problem that we can look at. So we can look at cultural relativism, because the problem here is that these countries, right, North Korea and so on, they claim that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and their vision of human rights are different from the Western vision of human rights. So we look at all this, we look at cultural relativism, we look at when it was created, we look at the successes and failures, and can we answer the question? Daniel, can you fucking answer the question? And it's more complicated. No, it's not fucking complicated. If we look at violence, if we look at violent conflict, any kind of war, any kind of humanitarian crisis, then we can say that it is fucking useless. Now, if we look at the UDHR, if we look at all the programs that the UN has, the different branches of the UN, we can say that it is still garbage, but at least they are trying to do something, right? At the end of the day, world cooperation is necessary, either for soft power, either to gain influence, either for young people to engage in politics. So that's what the UN is really about, to get an internship, to start working in the area, in the field. It isn't really about solving conflict. At the end of the day, it is what it is business.